The allegations Meghan has made are simply not true. Her account does not reflect what actually happened, and it has led the public to a deeply misleading impression. That version of events has no basis in...
The palace reception had been arranged to display unity, but one chair turned it into a public fracture. As senior guests watched, Meghan crossed the room and took the central seat reserved for Catherine. William saw her settle into the place carrying his wife's name, stopped without greeting anyone, and walked out through the reception doors. In that instant, royal politeness collapsed beneath something far more personal. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had entered expecting speeches, handshakes, and diplomatic warmth. Charity leaders, Commonwealth representatives, foreign envoys, and selected royals had gathered to project stability. A palace reception was a formal gathering, hosted by the monarch or senior family members, to strengthen public and international relationships, and every detail carried meaning. Catherine's absence for a private family commitment did not erase her position. Her engraved place card stood at the center of the senior royal row, marking her precedence beside the future king and acknowledging the role she was expected to carry one day. Meghan moved toward that chair without hesitation. She lifted Catherine's card, placed it aside, and sat down as conversations faded. William stopped several feet away. The prince looked at her, then at the displaced name, and his expression changed. He did not challenge Meghan or ask the room for silence. Instead, he handed his unopened speech folder to an aide, turned, and left through the nearest door without delivering the remarks everyone expected. The silence that followed carried more force than any accusation. William did not see a harmless seating mistake. He saw his wife's absence being treated as permission to occupy her place. Meghan remained seated, yet her confidence began to weaken. She gripped the chair as diplomats lowered their voices and courtiers exchanged alarmed looks. Her decision had lasted seconds, but his exit made it the defining act of the night. A senior aide retrieved Catherine's card, only for another courtier to stop him before he returned it. The disagreement spread quietly. Had Meghan misunderstood the arrangement, or challenged it knowingly? That question darkened when a protocol officer confirmed through the seating file that she had been shown the plan privately before entering. Meghan had known exactly whose chair stood at the center. Charles watched the doorway close behind his son, then turned to a senior aide. The king kept his voice low, but the question cut through the confusion. Who approved her access to that seat? William's departure shocked the guests, but the deeper wound was hidden in the three people whose histories had collided around Catherine's empty chair. To the watching room, the conflict appeared to concern a chair. To William, Meghan, and Catherine, it carried years of rivalry, separation, loyalty, and unresolved hurt. Catherine was not present to defend her place, yet every reaction seemed to revolve around her. William felt compelled to protect what her position represented, while Meghan faced the humiliating possibility that one decision had confirmed the palace's worst suspicions about her intentions. Catherine had earned that central position through years of restraint, discipline, and private sacrifice. Her place card was more than a name on a table. Royal precedence, the formal order deciding where senior family members stand or sit, placed her beside William because she was expected to share the burden of the monarchy's future. Even while absent for a family commitment, she remained present in the order of the room, and that was why moving her card carried such emotional weight. Meghan had entered the reception knowing every gesture would be judged. This was her first major palace gathering in a long time, and she understood that every pause, greeting, and assigned place would be treated as evidence of whether she had been welcomed or pushed aside. She saw the center chair as a rare chance to reclaim visibility. Yet the moment William left, that attempt at dignity became a public humiliation she could no longer control. Catherine received the news at home from a trusted aide who handed her a phone containing a written account from the palace. She read that William had walked out, lowered herself into a nearby chair, and remained silent for several seconds. Then she asked, "Did the reception continue?" Her voice stayed calm, but the question revealed sadness. She understood that his loyalty had protected her position while also turning her absence into the center of another family crisis. William stood inside a quiet antechamber, still holding back the anger he had refused to show publicly. He told an aide that Catherine's place did not become available simply because she was not physically there. The prince believed her absence had been exploited, and he demanded the original seating plan before anyone attempted to explain Meghan's decision away. Harry learned what had happened outside the main room. He felt furious that his brother had rejected Meghan so visibly, yet he also knew she had chosen the one chair most likely to provoke him. When he confronted her privately, she showed him a text received before the reception. "The center position has been cleared." Meghan admitted the sender had not identified themselves, but the message had convinced her the arrangement had changed. A darker detail soon emerged. Catherine's place card had disappeared for several minutes before the guests entered, then returned without explanation. William immediately ordered every version of the seating plan, every amendment, and the sender's identity to be traced. The reception exposed the fracture, but its first unmistakable warning had appeared weeks earlier, during a smaller ceremony almost everyone had dismissed. Weeks before the reception, a private investiture rehearsal had created the first open struggle over Catherine's position. There were no cameras, cheering crowds, or public statements, only a seating chart, a closed room, and one request that stunned the palace staff. Meghan had asked whether Catherine's ceremonial place could be reassigned whenever the princess was absent. William heard about that conversation within an hour, and from that moment, trust began to collapse. Meghan entered the palace ballroom already feeling watched. The rehearsal had been arranged for an upcoming Commonwealth Youth Ceremony, a formal event designed to honor young people from nations linked through the Commonwealth. Catherine was expected to attend beside William, while Meghan's role had not yet been confirmed. That uncertainty mattered because every assigned seat reflected status, acceptance, and access to the center of royal life. Catherine's chair remained marked, even though she was not present for the rehearsal. Palace precedents, the symbolic order deciding where each royal stands or sits, did not change according to personal preference or temporary absence. Her position beside the future king represented her place in the monarchy's next chapter, and the protocol director made that clear when Meghan pointed toward the empty seat. Meghan asked whether she could occupy it if Catherine failed to attend the final ceremony. The director refused at once. He explained that the position remained assigned to the princess whether she was physically present or not. Meghan placed her invitation on the table, met his eyes, and said, "An empty chair should not outrank a living guest." The room fell silent. He closed the seating file and ended the discussion without another word. William learned about the exchange through a documented account written by a senior courtier who had witnessed it. The aide repeated Meghan's exact words during a private briefing less than an hour later. He felt the request went beyond visibility. To the prince, it sounded like a challenge to Catherine's status at the precise moment she was absent and unable to answer for herself. Meghan left the ballroom believing the palace had already decided to keep her at the edge of every formal event. She felt diminished, not corrected. Her frustration hardened into resolve, and that emotional wound made her vulnerable to what happened next. A palace contact reached Meghan through an unlisted number and claimed the protocol director had become overprotective of Catherine's position. The sender suggested that senior approval could override the rules. Weeks later, the same language appeared again in the message sent before the reception. "The center position has been cleared." William compared that phrase with an internal rehearsal memo and saw the match immediately. Only a small group of staff had access to those words. The reception had not been a spontaneous misunderstanding. Someone inside the palace had used Meghan's resentment to divide the family, and once William understood that the chair had been placed at the center of a calculated test, leaving the reception was no longer enough. He needed to face Meghan directly. William did not return to the reception floor. Instead, he waited in a private drawing room and sent a message asking Meghan to meet him without cameras, speeches, or family advisors between them. When she entered, he placed Catherine's recovered name card on the table. Neither sat down. What followed was not a debate about protocol, it was the release of years of suspicion, resentment, and pain compressed into a few dangerous minutes. Meghan entered after the final guests had begun leaving. A senior aide closed the door behind her, while Harry, Charles, and palace officials remained outside at William's insistence. He wanted no institutional negotiation, meaning no formal discussion shaped by advisors, hierarchy, or carefully approved language. He wanted a direct answer. Years earlier, the two had attempted to trust each other, but disputes over public statements, loyalty, family boundaries, and Catherine had turned every exchange into a test of hidden motive. William pushed the bent place card toward her. "Did you know whose seat it was?" he asked. Meghan looked at Catherine's name and admitted she knew who had originally been assigned the chair. But she had received a message saying the arrangement had changed. The prince's restraint cracked. He told her that any courtier could have confirmed the change, and that moving the card herself had turned his wife's absence into an opportunity. Meghan refused to carry the entire blame. She said the palace repeatedly created uncertainty, encouraged her toward certain spaces, then punished her for entering them. Her voice sharpened as she accused people inside William's own household of designing a trap and waiting for her to make the final move. He answered that no message gave her the right to treat Catherine's position as negotiable. Catherine's name changed the air between them. William warned Meghan not to make his wife responsible for decisions made by staff. She replied that Catherine's silence had always carried more power than anything she could say. The future king stepped back. For several seconds neither spoke, because the argument had moved beyond one chair and into years of resentment neither could easily undo. Meghan finally unlocked her phone and showed him the text. "The center position has been cleared." William studied the wording and immediately recognized the clipped structure used in internal palace communications. He photographed the message and sent the number for an urgent trace. The response arrived before they left the room. The sender had used a restricted administrative line connected to reception planning, meaning someone with legitimate access had deliberately guided Meghan toward Catherine's chair. William did not apologize for walking out, but his accusation changed. She had made the choice, yet she had not created the trap alone. The confrontation did not restore trust, but it redirected William's anger toward the hidden hand controlling the evening from inside the palace. By morning, the crisis had moved from the reception hall to Charles's private office. The king sat with the original seating plan, Meghan's message, and a list of every official who had handled the arrangements. William stood opposite him, still refusing to treat the incident as a social mistake. Yet the decisive power belonged to Charles, whose response would determine whether Catherine's position was defended, Meghan was condemned, or the palace itself was forced to admit betrayal. Charles studied the printed message without speaking. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the folder, and read the wording again. As monarch, he controlled household access, senior appointments, ceremonial precedence, and the internal investigation. Ceremonial precedence meant the official order deciding where members of the royal family stood, sat, and appeared at formal events. William could demand action, but only the king could authorize consequences powerful enough to change the household. William wanted a public statement confirming Catherine's position and explaining why he had left. The prince argued that silence would allow others to reduce the incident to temper or jealousy. Charles disagreed. He warned that making the chair the center of an official defense could diminish everything Catherine had earned through years of service. The monarch needed to protect her dignity without turning one seat into the symbol of her entire value. William refused to accept that restraint meant silence. He told his father that quiet handling had already protected the person who created the trap and forced Catherine to carry the embarrassment. Unity, he said, could not survive if the same people were always expected to absorb disrespect for the sake of appearances. Charles heard the anger beneath those words, but he also heard something deeper. His son no longer trusted the palace to protect his wife. The altered plans made that distrust harder to dismiss. The original chart placed Meghan 3 seats from the center. A later version moved her closer, though it still did not assign Catherine's chair. Someone had approved the amendment using the initials of Charles's deputy private secretary. The deputy entered moments later and examined the document. he immediately denied authorizing it. In a recorded internal interview, he explained that the initials had been copied from an earlier file, creating the appearance of legitimate approval. Charles looked down at the page again, and disappointment hardened into decision. The king suspended every member of the reception planning team from ceremonial duties until the forged approval was traced. He also ordered that Catherine's place could never be reassigned without written permission from both the sovereign and William. Before the meeting ended, security staff identified the employee who had accessed the restricted line. The name belonged to someone linked to an earlier Sussex dispute, and Charles had protected Catherine's position on paper. But the first consequences would fall on people whose loyalties had been quietly divided for years. The palace suspension order spread through the royal households before breakfast had ended. Phones rang behind closed doors, staff were removed from schedules, and every family member received a different version of the night's events. Meghan felt she had been used and then abandoned. Harry believed William's walkout had publicly shamed his wife. Catherine faced the painful knowledge that her empty seat had become a weapon in a conflict she had never chosen to enter. The consequences moved quickly. Reception staff lost access to ceremonial planning systems, future guest lists were frozen, and scheduled royal appearances were reviewed for signs of interference. Ceremonial planning systems were the secure palace records used to control invitations, seating, access, and formal duties. The restrictions mattered because one altered instruction could now cast doubt over every event already approved by the same team. Harry read the official summary in a private sitting room and crushed the paper in one hand. He told Meghan that William should have spoken to her before walking out and allowing the room to judge her in silence. Yet he could not ignore the message on her phone. She admitted she should have verified the change, but she had feared that refusing the center seat would be treated as weakness. What she intended as confidence had become humiliation. Catherine carried a different wound. She asked William why he had not simply returned her name card to the table and remained at the reception. The prince said staying would have suggested acceptance. She answered that his departure had attached her name to another family rupture, even though she had never asked him to leave. William reached for her hand, but Catherine pulled away long enough to make her meaning clear. Protecting her position, she said, should not require turning her into the reason an entire room fell apart. Her restraint unsettled him more deeply than anger. He had acted out of loyalty, yet she was now carrying the emotional cost of that defense. Investigators soon identified the employee behind the restricted line, Eleanor Vane, a deputy events coordinator who had once worked with both the Sussex and Cambridge teams during a disputed joint engagement. In a recorded internal interview, Eleanor confessed that she had not acted to elevate Meghan. She wanted to prove how quickly the brothers would destroy a public event over Catherine's precedence, showing that the household had become impossible to govern. The confession changed everything. Meghan had made the final choice. William had made the dramatic exit, but someone else had deliberately placed both decisions on a collision course. Catherine then asked for a private meeting with Meghan before punishment was announced. William objected, but she refused to retreat. The family, she said, would never understand the truth while speaking through chairs, documents, and intermediaries. The crisis had been designed to make two women appear like rivals, and only a conversation without husbands, advisors, or palace rules could finally break that design. Catherine chose a small private room rather than a royal office. There were no aides behind the door, no seating chart on the table, and no husbands waiting inside to defend either woman. Meghan arrived prepared for accusation, but Catherine began with a question. Why did you believe taking my place would protect yours? The answer changed the emotional direction of the crisis because, for the first time, both women confronted the wound beneath the spectacle. Catherine had selected the room carefully. It stood away from ceremonial spaces, meaning the formal areas used for royal duties, official meetings, and displays of rank. She wanted no desk between them, and no chair placed higher than the other. Years of public comparison, family disputes, and private misunderstanding had repeatedly cast both women as rivals, even when their motives were more complicated than the story built around them. Meghan remained standing, until Catherine gestured toward two identical chairs positioned side by side. The arrangement mattered. No one occupied the center. No one was forced to sit below the other. She finally sat and admitted that she had known whose name belonged to the chair, but believed the message meant the palace had officially released it. Meghan did not hide behind the anonymous sender. She said resentment had shaped her judgment, and that moving Catherine's placecard herself had been wrong. She had wanted to prove that she could not be pushed to the edge again, yet the choice had made her appear willing to erase another woman to secure her own place. The confession was direct, and Catherine listened without interrupting. Catherine answered that her pain had never been about losing a seat for one evening. It came from seeing how easily both women could still be forced into repeating a rivalry created around them. She confessed that years of public composure had taught people to assume she felt nothing. William's walkout was intended as loyalty, but it also made her fear that her name had become a boundary everyone was expected either to defend or cross. Meghan then opened the full message chain on her phone. In the documented exchange, the sender first told her she deserved central recognition, then later wrote that the position had been cleared. Catherine understood the design immediately. Someone had studied Meghan's frustration and used it to provoke the exact reaction the palace feared. The two women agreed to give Charles a joint private account. Meghan would accept responsibility for taking the chair, while Catherine would insist that the forged instructions and internal manipulation be acknowledged. Neither demanded closeness. They chose honesty instead. Before leaving, Meghan asked whether William would ever believe she had not intended to erase Catherine. She answered that belief had to follow accountability, and the next public response would reveal whether anyone had truly learned from the night. Their private honesty ended the rivalry created inside the room, but outside the palace walls, the empty chair had already become a national symbol. By the following morning, the reception was no longer a private royal embarrassment. One image dominated screens across the country: Catherine's name card lying beside the center chair, while William's abandoned speech folder rested near the doorway. The photograph captured absence, anger, and displacement, without showing a single confrontation. Newspapers, broadcasters, and crowds transformed that image into a debate about dignity, privilege, loyalty, and whether the monarchy could survive its own emotional divisions. William's silent exit became more powerful than any prepared statement. News outlets reconstructed the evening from guest accounts, sudden palace schedule changes, and the photograph taken moments after he left. Supporters praised the prince for defending Catherine, while critics accused him of turning a seating dispute into a national crisis. Others focused on Meghan, arguing that forged instructions had placed her inside a trap, even though she had still chosen to move the card. One fictional morning newspaper captured the public mood with a front page titled, "The Chair That Broke the Room." Catherine's name lay face down in the foreground, while the doorway through which William had departed remained open behind it. The image spread because it carried several meanings at once. To some, it showed a future queen being disrespected. To others, it showed a divided family allowing ceremony to become more important than communication. The debate intensified during an evening television bulletin. A broadcaster placed two empty chairs in the studio and addressed the audience directly. One represented established duty, the other represented the demand to be recognized. The palace failed when it convinced both sides that only one could exist. The broadcast turned ceremonial precedence, the formal order that defines royal rank at official events, into a simple question of whether dignity had become something family members believed they had to take from one another. William watched the coverage alone with the television muted. He saw his departure replayed as proof of royal fracture, and understood that his attempt to protect Catherine had also made her absence impossible to escape. The future king had wanted to defend her place, yet he had helped transform that place into a public spectacle. Meghan faced the same image from another room. She ignored the headline and stared at Catherine's fallen card. Turning to Harry, she admitted that manipulation did not erase her own responsibility. Someone had guided her toward the chair, but she had been the person who moved the name. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd placed handwritten cards beside the gates reading, "Dignity is not a seat." The phrase spread, because it supported Catherine, without demanding Meghan's humiliation. Charles then released a concise palace statement confirming unauthorized interference, reaffirming Catherine's standing, and acknowledging that Meghan had acted on false guidance while making an inappropriate choice. The world had delivered its judgment on the chair, but the final verdict belonged to William, Catherine, and the family forced to live with what happened after the doors closed. The palace reception did not end with a winner. Catherine's position was reaffirmed, Meghan accepted that she had crossed a boundary, and the official who engineered the confrontation was removed. Yet the deepest consequence belonged to William. His walkout proved the strength of his loyalty, but it also revealed the danger of allowing protection to become public punishment. The monarchy survived the evening only when its members stopped defending symbols and began accepting responsibility for their choices. Charles authorized the final staff decision without hesitation. Eleanor Vane was dismissed from ceremonial planning and permanently denied access to future royal events. The formal palace record confirmed that she had copied approval marks, used a restricted communication line, and manipulated Meghan into provoking a family confrontation. Ceremonial planning meant the secure process controlling invitations, seating, duties, and official positions at royal occasions. Her removal mattered because the palace could not demand trust while allowing its own systems to be used as weapons. Charles also confirmed in writing that Catherine's place could never be reassigned during her absence without direct authorization. The king protected her standing without turning the decision into a campaign against Meghan. His order made one truth clear: Catherine's service had earned recognition, but no chair could define her worth. William later placed the unused speech folder on the table inside their private apartment. He told Catherine that he would walk out again rather than watch anyone erase her. She did not question his love. Instead, she asked whether leaving had truly been the strongest way to show it. William finally admitted the cost. His silence had allowed strangers, broadcasters, and courtiers to define his motives. The prince understood that protecting Catherine meant guarding her peace as well as her position. Public anger could defend someone in one moment while placing an even heavier burden on them afterward. Meghan chose accountability without excuses. In a handwritten letter delivered privately, she told Catherine that she should never have moved the name card and should have questioned the message before taking the chair. She did not blame hierarchy, staff, or confusion. Catherine accepted the apology, but did not pretend years of distrust had disappeared. Neither woman promised friendship. Both simply refused to be used against the other again. The next reception carried none of the old uncertainty. Catherine entered beside William and found her card secured at the center. Meghan's clearly assigned chair stood several places away. The future queen paused, sat down, and did not look toward the doorway. William's walkout was neither victory nor meaningless overreaction. It was an imperfect act of devotion that exposed manipulation and forced responsibility upon everyone involved. The crown had weakened when rank became a weapon, then recovered when truth replaced pride. The chair remained in the palace, but its power over the family ended the moment they stopped fighting over who could occupy it and finally understood what none of them should ever have sacrificed to reach it: trust. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.